Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Byrkit.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Byrkit. Thanks for tuning in again to Authentic Living with Roxanne. So today I have a special guest, Katherine Jansen-Byrkit, and she is someone that has I would say, a quite similar background to me in some sense. She's an author, she also speaks, she educates, and she's a licensed professional counselor with over 15 years of clinical experience. She has a holistic approach when she works with individuals to focus on personal growth, relationship transformation, and embodied wakefulness as part of one's spiritual path. So welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Roxanne. It's lovely to be with you.
So I know when you and I chatted a little while back, we talked a little bit about people like you and I, we pick these fields and we go into them, and I would say, based on lots of different reasons, we kind of adopt the element of introspection or maybe reflecting when we deal with people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that the average person kind of probably does that very often.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. That's why in the first aspect I worked with and explored in my book on wakefulness was relationship to self. And a piece of that is self-awareness. Just becoming more self-aware is transformational for so many people. They've kind of just been on autopilot. So that reflectiveness is so important and so helpful on that path of evolving and being our most conscious self.
For sure. So let's talk a little bit about, did you always want to do this kind of work? Was it a passion of yours that you followed, or how did you end up doing this kind of work?
Well, it was quite a journey because it really, in a way, started with trauma. My dad, he's passed now, but he was a therapist, but that was not my original calling. It was actually to be an attorney. But through the divorce and a way that he left, although he and I repaired greatly the damage that had been done, I kind of imploded at 16 years old. So I attempted suicide, thankfully, obviously did not complete that, and left high school, moved to San Francisco. But a piece of my journey was food addiction. And so once I realized, okay, I want to come back to Oregon, where I was from. San Francisco was lovely, and really I kind of got out of Dodge and I started to heal. On the way to become an attorney, you can get a bachelor's degree in anything. So I'm like, well, I really want to reclaim my body and my health. I'd always been healthy before what had happened. My pain was kind of manifesting again in food addiction. So I was quite heavy. And so as I went down that road, health just was so important to me. It became my career, and then went further to become a master's degree in public health. And I worked in that field for itself almost 20 years, 15 to 20 years. So it was at 39, actually, when I was on a personal retreat, that I kind of got the call from the universe, be a therapist. And so it's like, whoa, that involves a whole nother master's degree, and I already have benefits, and I'm raising children, and it wasn't convenient, but it's been incredible. So I was very much in love with public health, but it was time to do something different. And this really came through, and my partner was great about it. And now I've been in private practice the whole time, and I've written this book, and it's incredibly fulfilling. So I think your work feels the same to you. Yes.
Yes, and I probably took a different path than you. I started at 21. I got into psychotherapy at 21 because, when I went to school, when I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, I saw some dysfunction with my parents' marriage.
Oh,
And
mm,
I remember thinking there's nobody to talk to back
mm,
then. And I remember kind of
yeah,
just being able to connect it at a really young age. But in connecting, I could also offer a space for others that I would speak to.
yeah,
And I kind of thought, maybe, I don't want to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, or a teacher. Maybe
yeah.
there's something I could do
I love it.
through talking. And that's kind of, I think at about age 12 or 11 or 12, I decided I wanted to help, and kind of took that path, and
Yeah.
went into school quite young, and then got into the field. My very first job was responding to trauma, victims of crime at
Mm,
21. And now I think back,
wow.
what did I know at that point, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
have loved it and been able to do lots of different things in the field since. So let's
yeah.
let's pick up on that whole concept of that authentic self. That I talk a lot about that, and about awareness,
Mhm,
and really,
mhm,
spending that time in that internal space. I would say that, in the last year and a bit, the world has been forced to become more conscious.
mhm.
And what you're seeing with people that you deal with, and how are they dealing with, I'm going to say it's almost like a beckoning to consciousness, or
Yeah.
recognizing that maybe their unconsciousness is getting in their way. What have you been seeing with the people that you've been dealing with?
Well, I think for many people, COVID, as it was incredibly frightening, if not the hardship of getting ill or losing a family member, was very much a wake up call. And wake up calls can go a lot of different directions. Wake up calls can be, I'm really in an unhealthy relationship and it's time to go. A wake up call can be, I want to know I have immunity, or a strong immune system, so I'm going to take different care of my body, even though I can't be as active because I can't go to the gym. So I've been saying to my clients throughout the year, we don't have to get back on all the horses. Just because life will go back to what we experienced as normal, we've changed. Something is different, and that's a good thing. And again, it comes with hardship, and I want to be so respectful of that. Even just the social justice stuff that happened in the middle of all of this, with the trial happening in the States for George Floyd today, I believe it starts,
Oh,
and
yes.
realizing between the toxicity of individualism and our loss of true community and in a way tribe, and then with COVID, loss of tribe because I can't see my people, I can't touch my people. That excites me to think about some of these things actually, and there are deeper themes about how important we are to one another. We know that for babies can be impacted in terms of touch and love and attachment failure to thrive, but we are all that. So to me, I just am coaching and counseling clients to really listen to that inner voice, the inner voice within. And again, who you are in 2021 now might be a different authentic you than a year ago, with all that you've experienced.
Mhm. So what do you find, when I've been coaching people, people have massive anxiety, and
Mhm.
they're also having a lot of issues sleeping. Those seem to be the
Mhm.
two main pervasive things. Is that something that you're also kind of having people um,
Yes,
present
yes,
with? Okay.
yes. Yeah, and I seem to draw, though I professionally and personally have no judgment for those that are helped by medication, especially when you combine therapy. But and I seem to draw a lot of clients that are trying to really walk the walk on their own. So they don't want to take a sleeping pill at night, and they are very anxious. And a few deep breaths doesn't always do the trick. They practice mindfulness, they've done a little meditation, so that's another piece in my book, and it was so important. That's the second chapter of my book, is freedom from the mind, because anxiety is so driven by an anxious mind and thoughts we believe and rabbit holes we go down. So that's a tool that I really work with right away, even if somebody doesn't present with anxiety, to make sure they have a sense of how to work with that part of their humanity, so that I am not at the mercy of my thinking, with all the wildness of that. So, sometimes it's inner dialogue kinds of work. Sometimes it's about being honest about lifestyle in terms of the contribution that can make to overall health, which includes sleep and less anxiety. I love that you said that in the intro. I really try to pull together a holistic kind of approach to wellness. And so I think body practices are hugely important in contending with anxiety.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because when I got into the field years and years ago, the concept of the somatic, which is basically for people that may not understand that concept, something that we live with and deal with and teach people all the time. But the somatic back in, goodness, in the 1980s, I think maybe in certain Western parts of the world, Eastern parts philosophies, Western parts of maybe the US were more in alignment with that.
Yes. Yes.
And and we've come along so much, and I know you and I talked a little bit. That I've done EMDR, which is a body therapy, for years and years and years. And then you kind of look at what's happened, with people not sleeping, not being aware. I think in 2020, my sense is that it's almost like, if you had some bad habits, it became a bit more exponential, in that I could probably kind of get away with it, but being locked in, being worried about people dying, being worried about, what really is happening in the world. Like you said, all the civil unrest, that's a lot for the average person.
Yes.
All of us,
Yes.
like me included.
Yes.
I would say to people,
Yes.
if anybody tells you you're not stressed or anxious in 2020, I'm going to say, do you have a pulse? Because we all will go through heightened levels. But let's talk a little bit about what you do with your body, right? Because, like, to your point, like, people say, oh, I'm anxious, and people say, oh, take some breaths, or go, do little things. And we know that anxiety is a whole, to recover from anxiety, there are so many variables that you have to get into. So let's talk a little bit about the body and how that plays through with the mind.
That. Yeah, well, so kind of the body follows wherever the mind goes. So just to reiterate, we want to start with, can I be in this moment? Can I not follow every thought and believe it? And that will start to settle the nervous system. But then body practices and deeper body practices, like you say, a few breaths, maybe did it in 2018 or 2015, but there's a whole nother level. And I would even say the politics last year were another thing. And then the Pacific Northwest, we had wildfires. It was like one thing. It was a pylon. And it was like, well, okay, so you are resilient, and we have to dig deep and kind of find a new threshold. And so the tools in the wheelhouse to deal with how the human system is absorbing all of that. Because even if we tell ourselves it's okay, there's a level of angst because of the uncertainty. We were going to just flatten a curve for 2 weeks, and then it was just going to be till June, and then it just snowballed. And so that what I also teach is just appreciating there. As much as you can establish a sense of safety and kind of have that conversation with your body, actually, about that you can feel scared, and we don't know if we're going to get COVID, but right now and in this moment, we are safe. I think much deeper states of that were necessary for people to find. And so if you've never had, conversation with your body, that's a great place to start. If you don't know how to kind of do some soothing exercises, whether it's yoga, whether it is longer meditation and deeper breathing and breath work, even massage, just having body work done is a way to just kind of think about your system as a whole system that needs to be soothed.
Mm-hmm. That concept, I know you and I know what that means, but let's kind of dissect that a little bit more for people, because I often say, to people, when you were young, you had that warm, fuzzy blanket that you kind of probably took around as a child. But as adults, we're kind of like, we don't want to kind of dialogue about that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of like we're supposed to keep it hidden. But I would say that this has been brought to the light that much more, in the last little while. So like, what's your routines? And, a lot of businesses, executives talk about rituals and stuff like that. But it's so much deeper in that. I know for myself, Katherine, for instance, I walked through the snow sometimes for an hour and a half a day, sometimes just because I was stuck in my house and then doing the kind of work that we did. And a friend of mine and I would walk sometimes upwards of 3 to 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And, she said to me the other day, and I agreed with her, she said, I think we protected our mental health really, really well through this time. And, I walked alone, but I also walked with her, which was a difference. And, and that was something, and I walked, but I had never walked in such a way that I got clarity, even when I didn't even think I was looking for clarity.
Yeah, I hear you. There's some research, and I can't quote it, I apologize, but that couples actually do better if they walk and talk versus they just sit down to process something. That's just kind of an aside I'm thinking of. But the monotony, the lack of mobility, and the profound aloneness, those things. So even I was thinking of this when you were a young therapist at 21, you might not have known a lot about how to really work with that level of trauma. But what you did, Roxanne, was provide company. And I think what I have over the years of my clinical practice, as much as in my personal life, but especially seeing the power of undoing aloneness, rather than analytics and problem solving. And of course, we can't fix COVID. We had to deal with COVID. So there wasn't a problem we could fix. We had no control. But undoing aloneness, so you were with a friend some of those times, that's huge for our mental health. Again, that sense of getting out of this individualism that is so unhelpful. But then I was saying to people, mix it up, move your body. You can't fly anywhere. You're not going someplace, but just go to a different room for your next Zoom call. Don't do Taco Tuesdays, or put something different in them this week to spice it up. It's just so long to be in what, the research would say just as like forced isolation. They've done research on it, with astronauts and other groups, and people go a little very wild toward the end. It's called third quarter restlessness. And so just working with our own system, as it sounds like you did, and kind of seeing what you can do, because there was so much loss in what we couldn't do. And again, no endpoints. So we couldn't keep waiting for it to maybe turn around next month, or, and hope we didn't get a spike. Yeah, I think people understand their mental health. I was saying on a podcast a year ago, yes, we need to prevent a public health crisis, but we also need to prevent a mental health crisis.
I absolutely agree. And, what I've seen is that, situations that people were struggling with before COVID, if they didn't really come to terms with it and really almost sit with it at a deep, deep level, those behaviors have gotten, unfortunately, gone in the wrong directions, where their coping strategies have gotten more defective or dysfunctional.
Exactly. Yeah, there's, the suicide rate is up, as you well know, or may have talked about on your show, but just the love, people have gained weight, they were eating, they weren't moving, the alcohol use and abuse has gone up. And so it's a time to kind of shake off those coping strategies, and again, maybe use this time as a return to normal. Kind of doubling down maybe on the commitment to one's health, mental health, and physical health, as we go back into having a lot of choices. But yeah, COVID lifted, the veil's lifted. We saw really hard stuff. We saw amazing stuff. It was kind of, there was nowhere else to turn, because like you said, it was kind of that deeper quieting that one had to do because of just how still life was.
Right. And even if you try to escape, the reality is, you can't run from yourself, especially when you're physically. I don't care if you lived in a mansion
That's
or if
right.
you lived in
That's right.
a 2x4 room. For the first time, I think a lot of people are recognizing the diversions, which there's a lot of healthy diversions as well.
Yeah.
We couldn't use that to get some of the benefits that we used to in the past.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's, again, a relationship. I like to say these words, who are you? And is your life, your body, and your relationships, are all of those a reflection of who you are? So if I am self-loving, then what I put into my body is loving. And I exercise, but I don't exercise. And if I'm stressed, maybe that bath or the walk or a call to a friend versus a beer or a glass of wine or vegging out on too much screen time. Like it almost, it has forced so many people to have to face, like you said, their low hanging fruit of these were not great habits, but they were more in moderation until this last year. So again, that's a good thing because it's like really facing, not that many people feel like their life is soon to be over, but in a way we're all on borrowed time. So both for longevity and vitality's sake, what is your relationship to that part of your life, how you take care of yourself or don't? Yeah.
So let's talk about the book and
Okay.
the concepts. And I'm going to assume that this book would have, would been valuable to a lot of people, because I think, a lot of people are looking for direction. They're looking for a deeper connection to themselves and to the world. And like meaning and purpose, I think has been brought, I know in my life, it's been brought me more to thinking about, okay, I know why I'm here. I know what I've done. I know what I love, but what now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I split the book into two parts, the inner world and the outer world. And I really believe in my own journey and in very much of my practice, change comes from the inside out. So I defined the sense of self as not the ego self, not just the individual human self. We are human, but something more. And I left it just as a kind of a state of presence, connection to something bigger outside of me. Some people would call that God, other people would not call that God. I really steered away from that because that wasn't really the point. I think we all can have that sense of what sources us is us, that this incredible, powerful energy that we are, that animates this human body of you and I, for example. So, but so many people when they think about a relationship to self, it's a very dangerous, very negative, very critical. So my first foundation of the book is establishing who am I? I'm something, I am not just my individual self, but connected to something larger. And it includes my intrinsic worth, which is a huge piece of my clinical practice. Many people don't really embody intrinsic worth and intrinsic belonging. So I had to set the tone of the book of who is this river that is Katherine moving toward this ocean, which is the vastness that is the source of life. Right? And then I went to the mind, the body, mindfulness, embracing death and dying. And then in the outer part, relationships, finding your way in a troubled world. I believe we're connected to nature and we're part of nature. So I actually have an aspect on nature. And then for those that don't have an assigned religion, but they really identify as spiritual, just some ideas about finding one's own spiritual path. But what I did, Roxanne, is I put in practices, because a lot of these ideas are great ideas and I'm not the first to present them. But how do you go from not having intrinsic worth to having it? We have to change our brain. That's neural pathway work. So I would have an idea in a section. I would have practices to start to manifest that in one's life. And then I would have an inspiring story from the field. So most of them weren't me. I have a few of my stories. Many of my clients, of course, with their permission and not their real names. A few of my children are in the book because I felt like I needed to say this is real. actually somebody really is doing this. Like I have a client who was diagnosed with bipolar, and that used to be his only definition of himself.
Mhm.
And in the section, it's called Path versus Pathology. He still takes medication, although a lot less. But this was a way to wake up to this got me to therapy and has been part of my path, but a very different kind of way to hold it as his. So that's a very long description of the book.
No, but
there you go.
it sounds fantastic, because I would think that, because like with all of us, like for instance, I'm using my walk again, but I remember when I would go on my walks, the first 45 minutes, nothing would kick in when I was on my own. But the latter part of my walk, I would, so I would maybe be reflecting on something, maybe, right? And then I would get a voice, a deep down. I was like, okay, is this me? Is this me? Is that? And then I would get these messages that would say, hey, whatever, I was thinking about, maybe you should think about this, or have you considered this? And I'm like, and then I'd be telling my sister after, and she goes, okay, you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. But then I realized that it was basically messages that were coming from a bigger space within, from wherever. And I could formulate after, not when I was walking, but after I came back, and maybe I kind of thought about it after. I'm like, wow, this is something that maybe not consciously been recognizing that I've been thinking about, but it's maybe something that's been in my space.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and I was trying to capture it. This is me now, because I'm like, okay, I like that, but guess what? It wouldn't come when I wanted it to come.
Right. Well, see, what I'm hearing that I love is the sense of emergence. So something came from deep within or beyond, or both, however we want to language that wasn't your mind trying to problem solve and analyze and think your way there. And so there was movement. There was some time. You didn't try to have this happen in 7 minutes. It was even after 45. There was a patience in that. And then it arose. And that is how truth, that is how our own inner wisdom, that is how our own inner guidance happens. And so I really love that you're sharing that, to take the time and create the space. There is so much internally that is available. Yeah.
So let's say the average person is listening and they go, okay, Roxanne and Catherine, this is all sounds well and good. You two kind of, hang out in that space. But I'm having a tough time. I'm anxious or depressed. I'm stuck at home potentially until, whenever, or, I'm juggling a spouse and working at home with my children and all that stuff. Where do I just start? Like to start.
I hear you. Well, and I wrote the book, each of these aspects you can actually dive into. So say all of a sudden I have some kind of a person in my life with a terminal illness. I might start with embracing death and dying and beginning to think about how does one actually navigate that wakefully. My book is all about the grit, because I've had a temper. And I had to really face that and face the consequences of that. I am 30 years into my marriage, though I'm a kid of a divorce. So I'm always amazed that we're doing it with 6 children and 10 grandchildren, and we have a huge tribe. And it's really in the messy that is the powerful stuff. This isn't about you and I just having a nice conversation conceptually about what it is to be awake and live consciously. It's actually in the hard stuff. And so to me, it's not, transcendent of our circumstances. It's through our circumstances. So if we can meet, for example, that anxiety and depression without judgment and with curiosity and shame and without shame, wow, now I'm experiencing this, not I am depressed kind of thing. And where do I go? And if I listen deeply, what would my depression speak to? What do I know? Whatever is sourcing that would, if we are aware and we make space for that awareness, it will often come, or with the help of a professional or a coach. And so I think we always have to start right where we are. If we have a difficult relationship in our lives, we go very slowly and simply, and we start there. So what is one way this relationship and I in it could be myself at best and differently than I've been? And then I'm part of a changing dynamic, even though I'm not trying to change someone else. So I come, as you can tell, from a quite an empowerment kind of place, that there's a lot that pulses within us in terms of the influence we have over our own lives. But people can feel pretty downtrodden, feel pretty hopeless, feel pretty separate from others. And so we don't know that we have those capacities always, for sure.
So for people that would want to, kind of look at, what my intrinsic value is, or I'm going through loss, or I'm petrified about loss because, of where we're at, and we're talking about the first vaccine and the second one, and we're not going to be completely fine, and we may never be fine. So that fear, is real, in a lot of people's brains.
Yeah.
Where could they pick up the book, or even reach out to you to be able to gain more information?
Sure. Well, if they want a signed copy, they can go to my website, which is harborglowholistic.com. But the book River to Ocean, Live in the Flow of Wakefulness is also on Audible if they want to listen. I have a great narrator, a wonderful woman named Leslie Howard, who narrated it. And it's also on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, some of the independent sources. So there's different ways to get a hold of the book. And I wrote this book because for some people, they won't ever see a therapist. They can't afford a therapist. And there have been so many therapists and spiritual teachers that have helped me, and I can be my children's therapist. I really wrote this book as a handbook. You're going through this, see, there's hope. Basically, it feels like a book of hope. And again, not a memoir, but my story is throughout, and I have had my own struggles, and I decided to be super transparent about that because I think that's how we can offer that hand to someone else and undo their aloneness, even though I may not meet them. My practice is super full, so I'm not necessarily taking a lot of new clients, but I do retreats as well. So I've had people sometimes do wakefulness retreats or couples retreats. I do a lot of couples work. So
awesome.
I would love to hear from your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Mm-hmm. And for everybody, what's one thing I'm taking away? Do not underestimate the impact of movement and what it allows you to do, which is to get out of your conscious mind and get into your unconscious space. And every time you think, oh, I don't know what to do, to Catherine's point, just say, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to show me? And, that's a space that we all have within ourselves. And I always call it that deep, authentic voice, but we need to quiet the noise and of our digital spaces, which is robbing us of that peace of mind to be able to listen. So try, even if you start just for 5 minutes to slow your mind. It's like anything else. It's like, doing a bicep curl. It gets easier each and every time, even though it might be painful at first, which we all know that slowing the mind and listening to the body is not an easy thing. So Katherine, thanks so much for your time again. And
thank you for having me.
And all the information about being able to connect with her will be in the show notes. And for myself, if you're looking for guidance on authentic leadership, either at home or at work, you can reach me at roxannedurhodge.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.